The resignation letter felt heavier than it should have in my trembling hands. 24 hours earlier, I thought I had the perfect job. Now, I was staring at my own professional death warrant, black ink on white paper, my signature sealing 5 years of dedication into a manila envelope that would disappear into HR filing cabinets forever. My boss Marcus sat across from me, his fingers drumming against the mahogany desk like a funeral march. The corner office that had once seemed impressive now felt like a courtroom where I was both defendant and victim. Outside, Seattle's gray morning matched the storm brewing in my chest. You understand this is the only option, right? His voice carried that familiar condescending tone that had poisoned our relationship for months. The restructuring leaves no room for your position. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the desk and storm out like they do in movies. Instead, I nodded, because that's what people like me do. We nod, we comply. We disappear quietly while others take credit for our work. The whole thing started 3 months ago when Marcus arrived as the new VP of Operations. Fresh MBA, Harvard pedigree, the kind of corporate climber who saw people like me as stepping stones. I'd been with the company since graduation, working my way up from junior analyst to senior project manager, building relationships, delivering results that saved the company millions. But Marcus had different plans. The first red flag came during my quarterly review. Projects I'd spearheaded for 2 years suddenly became team efforts. The client presentation that earned us our biggest contract somehow transformed into his strategic vision. My innovations became his initiatives, my late nights became his leadership. Sarah, you need to understand the bigger picture, he'd said during one particularly brutal meeting. Individual contributions matter less than departmental synergy. Departmental synergy. Corporate speak for, shut up and let me steal your work. I'd documented everything, of course, email threads, project timelines, client testimonials with my name prominently featured. But documentation means nothing when your boss controls the narrative. Marcus had a gift for rewriting history, turning my victories into his stepping stones toward the executive suite. The final blow came last week. The Morrison account, a pharmaceutical client I'd nurtured for 3 years, decided to expand their contract by 40%. The deal was worth $12 million over 2 years, and I'd negotiated every detail, smoothed every concern, built every bridge that made it possible. The celebration should have been mine. Instead, Marcus called an all-hands meeting to announce his successful client retention strategy. He stood at the front of the conference room, PowerPoint slides filled with my analysis, my recommendations, my relationship-building efforts, all branded with his conclusions about market positioning and client psychology. I sat in the back, invisible, watching my career achievements become his promotion portfolio. That's when I made my first mistake. I trusted HR. I have documentation, I told Jennifer from Human Resources during what I thought was a confidential meeting. Email chains, client feedback, project files that clearly show my contributions. Jennifer nodded sympathetically, took detailed notes, promised a thorough investigation. 2 days later, Marcus called me into his office with a new urgency in his voice. Sarah, we need to discuss your future with the company. The trap had been sprung. My complaint to HR had somehow become evidence of my inability to work collaboratively. My detailed documentation became proof that I was territorial and resistant to team-based leadership. Every email I'd forwarded to protect myself had been twisted into a weapon against my professionalism. The company is moving in a different direction, Marcus continued, his words rehearsed and clinical. Your skill set, while valuable, doesn't align with our evolving needs. Translation: I knew too much about his theft, and I had to go. The resignation letter was his masterstroke, not a termination that might trigger questions or require explanations. A voluntary resignation that would make me disappear cleanly, quietly, without messy investigations or uncomfortable conversations with senior leadership. If you resign today, we can provide a generous severance package and positive references, he said, sliding papers across his desk. If you choose to fight this, well, the documentation suggests some performance issues that could make future employment challenging. The threat hung in the air like smoke. My stolen work had become a gun pointed at my professional future, and Marcus held the trigger. I signed the letter because I was tired of fighting a system designed to protect people like him and discard people like me. Tired of explaining why recognition mattered, why credit deserved to go where credit was due, why my 5 years of dedication should count for something. The elevator ride down from the 34th floor felt like falling. Each descending number marked another step away from the career I'd built, the relationships I'd fostered, the future I'd planned. By the time I reached the lobby, I was already becoming a memory, another casualty of corporate ambition and systematic theft. I drove home in a daze, my phone buzzing with texts from colleagues who'd heard whispers about my sudden departure. How do you explain that you've been erased? That your contributions have been redistributed to someone else's portfolio, while you're painted as a problem that needed solving? The afternoon stretched endlessly. I sat in my apartment, staring at 5 years of performance reviews, client thank you notes, and project completion certificates. Evidence of a career that had somehow become invisible, contributions that had been reassigned to someone else's narrative. My phone sat silent on the coffee table, no calls from colleagues expressing concern or confusion, no messages from clients asking about my departure. Marcus had managed my erasure with surgical precision, leaving no loose ends, no uncomfortable questions. That's when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Probably a recruiter who'd heard about my availability, ready to offer some lateral move that would get me back to where I started 5 years ago. Hello? Sarah Mitchell? The voice was unfamiliar but carried an authority that made me sit straighter. This is Robert Chen, CEO of the company. I understand you submitted your resignation today. My blood stopped moving. Robert Chen was a legend in the industry, the kind of executive who built companies from nothing and turned them into industry leaders. I'd seen him exactly twice in 5 years, both times from across crowded auditoriums during company-wide presentations. Yes, sir, I did. Before we process that resignation, I'd like to speak with you. Are you available to come back to the office this afternoon? The question hung in the air like an impossible lifeline. Of course, Mr. Chen, when would be convenient? Now would be good. My assistant will meet you at the main reception. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone like it had sprouted wings. Why would the CEO want to speak with me? How did he even know who I was? The drive back to the office felt surreal, like returning to a crime scene where I was both victim and witness. The same building that had expelled me 3 hours earlier now loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting afternoon clouds that seemed to mirror my confusion. Robert Chen's office occupied the entire western corner of the 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Elliott Bay and Mount Rainier. I'd never been this high in my own building, never seen the company from this perspective. Chen stood behind his desk, studying what appeared to be a thick folder of paperwork. He was smaller than he appeared in company photos, but his presence filled the massive office like electricity fills copper wire. Sarah, thank you for coming back. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. I have some questions about your resignation. Of course, sir. According to this documentation, you voluntarily resigned due to a mismatch between your skills and company direction. He looked up from the folder, his expression unreadable. Is that accurate? The question felt loaded, dangerous. How much did he know? How much should I reveal? The situation was complex, Mr. Chen. Complex. He set the folder down and leaned back in his chair. Tell me about the Morrison account. My heart started pounding. Sir? Pharmaceutical client, 40% expansion, 12 million over 2 years. According to the paperwork, this was Marcus's strategic victory. Chen's eyes never left mine. But that's interesting, because Morrison specifically requested to speak with you during the negotiation process. They mentioned your relationship-building efforts, your understanding of their supply chain challenges, your innovative solutions to their regulatory compliance issues. The room felt like it was spinning. I worked closely with that client, yes. So closely that they called me personally this morning when they heard about your departure. They were confused, you see, about why their primary contact was leaving right after delivering such excellent results. Chen opened the folder again, pulling out several sheets of paper. They were especially confused because they'd sent multiple emails over the past 3 months praising your specific contributions to the contract expansion. I stared at the papers in his hands, recognizing the Morrison Pharmaceuticals letterhead. Then I started asking questions. Chen continued. Funny thing about being CEO, you get access to all the email servers, all the project files, all the documentation that middle management thinks they control. The air in the office felt thin. Mr. Chen, I'm not sure what you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, Sarah, I'm stating facts. He spread several printed emails across his desk. Here's a message thread where you outline the entire strategy for Morrison's expansion. Here's another where you identify the regulatory hurdles and propose solutions. Here's client feedback specifically mentioning your innovative approach to their compliance framework. My stolen work stared back at me from his desk, printed in black and white, impossible to deny or rewrite. And here, Chen continued, pulling out another document, is Marcus's presentation to the executive committee, claiming credit for strategy development, client relationship management, and deal closure. He looked up at me, his expression sharp as broken glass. Strange how his strategic insights match your email recommendations word for word. The truth hung in the air between us like a sword ready to fall. I'd been discovered, but not as the problem employee Marcus had painted me to be. I'd been discovered as the victim of systematic theft. Sarah, I need you to understand something about how I run this company. Results matter, innovation matters. But integrity matters most of all. Chen leaned forward, his voice carrying new intensity. What happened to you is not just theft, it's sabotage of everything we're trying to build here. Mr. Chen, I appreciate your concern, but the resignation has already been processed. No, it hasn't. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out my resignation letter, the one I'd signed 3 hours earlier in Marcus's office. Funny thing about resignations, they don't become official until the CEO reviews them, and I'm not accepting this one. The letter lay on his desk like evidence in a trial where the verdict had suddenly reversed. In fact, Chen continued, I'm offering you a different option, VP of Client Strategy, reporting directly to me. Triple your current salary, plus equity package that vests over 4 years. Your first project will be developing company-wide protocols to prevent exactly what happened to you from happening to anyone else. The words hit me like lightning. VP of Client Strategy. Direct report to the CEO. Triple salary. Equity package. I don't understand, Mr. Chen. You built a $12 million relationship from nothing. You innovated solutions that our competitors couldn't match. You did this while someone was actively working to undermine and erase your contributions. Chen stood up, his silhouette framed against the Seattle skyline. That's not just resilience, Sarah. That's exactly the kind of leadership this company needs. My mind raced through implications, possibilities, the sheer impossibility of this reversal. 3 hours ago, I was a problem employee being managed out quietly. Now I was being offered a position 2 levels above my previous role. What about Marcus? Marcus is no longer with the company as of 1 hour ago. Turns out, when you dig deeper into his record, the Morrison account wasn't the only place where credit was misappropriated. Chen returned to his chair, his expression grim. Systematic theft of employee contributions is grounds for immediate termination and potential legal action. The building seemed to shift around me, reality rearranging itself into a new configuration where victims became leaders and thieves faced consequences. Sarah, I need an answer. Will you accept the position? The question hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to someone who'd been drowning for so long she'd forgotten what breathing felt like. 3 hours ago, I was driving away from this building as an erased employee. Now, I was being offered the chance to rewrite not just my own career, but the entire system that had nearly destroyed it. Yes, Mr. Chen, I accept. The handshake felt like signing a treaty that ended a war I didn't know I'd been fighting. As I left his office, the building looked different, felt different. The same elevators, the same floors, the same corporate artwork on the walls, but everything had shifted into a new reality where competence was recognized, theft was punished, and victims could become leaders. My phone buzzed with a text from a colleague. Heard about your resignation. Sorry to see you go. I stared at the message, realizing that news of my departure had spread through the office like wildfire while I was in Chen's office being offered a promotion that would shock everyone who thought they'd seen me disappear. The next few hours would bring questions, explanations, and the delicious task of watching people's faces as they learned that my erasure had become my elevation. Marcus's theft had backfired spectacularly, exposing not just his crimes but my value to someone who actually mattered. As I drove home for the second time that day, my phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number immediately. Sarah, this is David Morrison from Morrison Pharmaceuticals. I just heard the strangest rumor that you're leaving the company. Please tell me that's not true. I smiled, feeling power return to my voice for the first time in months. Actually, David, I'm staying, and I've just been promoted to VP of Client Strategy. Looks like our partnership is going to get even stronger. The conversation that followed lasted 30 minutes, filled with congratulations, genuine excitement about future collaboration, and pointed questions about Marcus's sudden departure. Word would spread through the industry network that client relationships were built on trust, competence, and genuine value, not corporate politics and stolen credit. By evening, my phone had become a celebration device, buzzing constantly with messages from colleagues who'd heard whispers about the day's dramatic reversals. The story would spread through the office like electricity. The quiet employee who'd been pushed out in the morning had returned in the afternoon as a VP reporting to the CEO himself. But the real victory wasn't the title or the salary or even the equity package. The real victory was walking back into that building tomorrow morning as someone whose contributions would be recognized, whose innovations would be credited properly, whose voice would carry the authority to prevent other talented people from suffering the systematic erasure I'd endured. Marcus had tried to bury me, but he'd accidentally planted seeds instead. My stolen work had become evidence of my value, my documentation had become proof of my competence, and my quiet professionalism had become the foundation for rebuilding something better. The resignation letter that should have ended my career had become the catalyst for its true beginning. Sometimes the darkest moment comes just before dawn breaks across the horizon, revealing a landscape that's more beautiful than anything you'd imagined possible. As I sat in my apartment that evening, surrounded by the same performance reviews and client testimonials that had felt like epitaphs 12 hours earlier, they looked different now. Not evidence of a career that had been stolen, but building blocks for something that couldn't be taken away. My phone buzzed one final time with a message from an unknown number. Congratulations on your promotion. Looking forward to working with someone who understands that integrity and results go hand in hand. Robert Chen. The message felt like a promise that this change was real, permanent, protected by someone who had the power to make it stick. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new opportunities to prove that the quiet employee who'd almost been erased could become the leader who'd prevent it from happening to anyone else. The resignation I'd signed that morning lay in some forgotten filing cabinet, a document that would never see the light of day because the CEO had decided that losing people like me was not acceptable, while protecting people like Marcus was unconscionable. Justice had arrived wearing an expensive suit and carrying the authority to rewrite the entire story. My career hadn't ended, it had finally begun.